I am 70 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I had seen every form of betrayal life could throw at me. I had buried my wife, survived friends turning their backs on me, and endured the loneliness that creeps in when your children no longer call as often as they used to. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own grandson, the boy I once cradled in my arms, looked me straight in the eye and told me I was weak. Those words did not come during an argument or in a moment of youthful rebellion. No. They came as he placed a set of legal papers in front of me, his signature already scribbled on the lines mine waiting to follow. "Sign it, Grandpa," he said with a smile that carried no warmth. "You're old now, you can't handle all this. Let me take care of everything before it's too late." The papers were not some simple document for help with errands or a harmless agreement. They were property transfer deeds. With one shaky signature, I would hand over the land, the house, the savings account, everything I had built in a lifetime of hard work. The same house where my late wife and I raised our children, the same land I had broken my back to keep through droughts, debts, and endless nights. And there he was, my own grandson, pushing me to surrender it all, as if my dignity and sacrifices had evaporated with age. I remember my hand trembling, not because I wanted to sign, but because rage was boiling inside me. He leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "You're not strong enough anymore. You're just old." It was as if the knife went straight through my chest. At that moment, I looked into his eyes and realized something terrifying. He didn't see me as his grandfather anymore. He saw me as an obstacle, an old man standing in the way of his ambition. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Silence was my shield, for if I had spoken, the fury might have erupted too soon. Around me, the room was heavy with expectation. My daughter, his mother, avoided my eyes, as if ashamed to be part of this theater. Others shifted uncomfortably, but no one stopped him. They were waiting for me to fold, to give in, to play the role of the powerless elder who no longer has a voice. In that silence, memories flashed through me like lightning. The night I carried him on my shoulders during the town fair. The afternoons I taught him how to hold a hammer, how to drive a nail straight. The day I gave him his first watch, telling him that a man's word must be as precise as time itself. And yet here he was dismissing me as though all of that meant nothing, as though my worth had expired with my age. I felt the weight of decades pressing against my chest. They thought I was frail. They thought my mind was dim. They thought my spirit was already buried. But deep down, a fire still burned. A fire that had carried me through wars, both literal and personal, through the collapse of businesses, through the death of loved ones. A fire they had forgotten, because I had been too gentle, too generous, too forgiving. And now they mistook that gentleness for weakness. I looked at him again. His smirk was carved deep, his confidence absolute. He thought he had already won. He thought this was the moment the old man surrendered everything. But I had a secret. I had prepared for this day long before he even knew the meaning of greed. My silence was not fear, it was calculation. And yet I let the scene play out because betrayal is not just about the signature on a paper. Betrayal is about watching how far someone you once loved will go to hurt you, how much they are willing to strip away before they feel satisfied. I wanted to see it all, to let him reveal his true face, to let the family witness the mask fall away. And when the time came, when the truth stood bare and undeniable, I would not just defend myself. I would reclaim everything, my dignity, my legacy, my honor. You may ask yourself, how does a 70-year-old man defeat a young, strong grandson who believes power is on his side? How does one frail signature become the battleground for justice, for love, for truth? That is exactly what I am going to tell you. But first, You need to understand where this story began, long before the courtroom, long before the papers on the table. It began with trust. It began with love. And it began with the belief that family would never turn against its own. Because the greatest betrayals are not committed by strangers. They come from the ones you hold closest, the ones you raise, the ones you believe would defend you until the end. And when those betrayals happen, you have two choices: surrender or rise. I chose to rise. Before the courtroom, before the bitter stares across the family table, there was a time when my grandson was the light of my life. His name is Daniel, and when he was born, I thought the world had given me a second chance at joy. My own children were already grown, scattered in their own lives, and the house that had once echoed with laughter had grown too quiet. But the day Daniel's tiny fingers wrapped around mine, something inside me reignited. I looked down at him in that hospital room and whispered, "I'll always be here for you." I meant it with every fiber of my being. In those early years, he followed me everywhere. I still remember the way his small boots slapped against the floorboards as he trailed behind me in the workshop. I was a carpenter most of my life, working with wood, the way some men worked with clay. To me, a block of oak was not just wood. It was possibility, it was legacy. Daniel would sit on an old stool, his wide eyes fixed on me as I planed edges or hammered nails. "Can I try, Grandpa?" he would ask, and I'd hand him a small hammer guiding his little hand to strike the nail straight. The look of pride on his face the first time he hit it right was worth more than any paycheck. Summers were our golden season. I'd take him fishing at the lake a few miles from our town, just as I had once taken his mother when she was his age. He was never patient, always tugging the line too soon, but I didn't care if we caught nothing. What mattered was the time, the bond, the stories I told him about his grandmother, and the way she used to sit on that very bank smiling at the water as if she could see our future in the ripples. Sometimes after sunset, we'd walk back home carrying only tangled lines and muddy shoes, but Daniel would chatter endlessly about the frogs we saw or the eagle overhead. Those moments filled me with a quiet happiness I thought I had lost. I taught him values in those years. I told him that a man's strength was not in his fists but in his word. I gave him his first watch on his 10th birthday, a modest silver timepiece I had saved up for months to buy. I remember fastening it on his wrist and saying, "This watch will remind you that time is precious and so is your promise. Don't ever give your word unless you intend to keep it." He nodded solemnly, his young eyes serious as if he understood the weight of that lesson. The boy grew, and with each year my pride in him deepened. When his parents struggled, I stepped in without hesitation. School fees, sports uniforms, medical bills when he broke his arm playing soccer, I covered it all. I told myself it was what grandfathers were for, to step in where life had made gaps. Money didn't matter as much as seeing Daniel thrive. I had worked hard my whole life, lived frugally, saved carefully, and I believed there was no better use for it than ensuring his future. Even when my health began to decline, I pushed through for him. Arthritis gnawed at my hands, but I still carved wood with him at my side. High blood pressure made me dizzy at times, but I still walked to his school plays, never missing a single one. I remember sitting in the front row while he played a tree in the school production of The Wizard of Oz. He waved at me from the stage, and I waved back with tears in my eyes, because even as a tree, he was my star. And in return, he gave me something priceless. He made me feel needed again. After my wife passed, loneliness had become my shadow. I would sit at the kitchen table staring at her empty chair, listening to the silence of a house that once bustled with life. But then Daniel would burst through the door after school, dropping his backpack on the floor, shouting, "Grandpa, I'm hungry," or "Grandpa, guess what happened today?" That energy, that presence was medicine. He filled the empty spaces with laughter and chaos, and for a time I felt whole again. I believed I was building not just memories, but a bond stronger than steel. I believed that when the time came, and I was frail, Daniel would stand by me the way I had stood by him. I believed my sacrifices were weaving an unbreakable net of loyalty and love. And perhaps that belief blinded me because I missed the small cracks forming over the years. When Daniel entered his teenage years, things began to change. He became restless, impatient with my stories, uninterested in the old tools and fishing trips. I told myself it was normal, every teenager pulls away. Still, I tried to bridge the gap. I bought him a second-hand car for his 17th birthday, dipping deep into my savings. I told him this is so you can get to school, to work wherever you need. But remember, responsibility comes with freedom. He hugged me, and for a moment the old warmth returned. But as the months went on, the car was scratched, the bills for gas and repairs mysteriously found their way back to my pocket, and Daniel no longer sat in the workshop or walked with me by the lake. Instead, he disappeared into a world of friends I didn't know, late nights I didn't understand, and excuses that grew thinner each time. I still covered for him, still believed in him, still told myself this was just a phase. I remember one evening when he came home with new sneakers, the kind that cost more than a week of groceries. I asked him where he got the money, and he laughed, brushing me off. "Don't worry about it, Grandpa. You wouldn't get it." I let it slide, though unease tugged at me. Because in my heart, I wanted to keep believing in the boy who once sat on a stool, with wide eyes, hammer in hand, eager to learn. That is why the betrayal cut so deep. You cannot be stabbed where there is no trust. And I had given him all of mine. Every memory, every dollar, every ounce of patience and love. I gave because I thought love, when given enough, transforms even the hardest soul. I gave because I wanted him to grow into a man who would make me proud. And for years I thought he would. But looking back now, I see the warning signs were there long before the papers slid across the table. The subtle disrespect, the dismissive words, the entitlement that crept into his tone. They were whispers of what was to come. And though I ignored them, though I told myself not to see, they grew louder with each passing year. Yes, before the courtroom there was love. Before the betrayal there was trust. And before my grandson called me weak, there was a time I believed I had raised a man who would honor his family name. That is the tragedy of this story. The pain comes not from strangers, but from the ones who once made you smile. It started with little things, the kind of details you might brush aside if you love someone too much to look at them clearly. I remember the first time money went missing from the small tin box I kept in the kitchen drawer. It wasn't much, just a few bills I had set aside for groceries. At first I thought I must have misplaced them, maybe used them and forgotten. I told myself age was playing tricks on me. But then it happened again and again. Small amounts at first, then larger, and the pattern was too sharp to be coincidence. When I asked Daniel, he laughed it off. "Grandpa, you're just forgetting. Don't worry, I'll pick up groceries for you tomorrow." His smile was disarming, the same smile I once believed was pure innocence. But I noticed how his eyes didn't quite meet mine. A seed of doubt planted itself in my chest, but I swallowed it. Because to accuse him outright felt like accusing myself of failure. If he had taken it, then I had raised him to betray me. That was a truth I wasn't ready to face. Soon after, I noticed how his tone shifted. He no longer called me Grandpa with that warmth. Instead, he spoke quickly, dismissively, as though I were an old neighbor he barely tolerated. He stopped asking me questions, stopped listening to my stories, stopped seeking my advice. When I'd remind him of chores or responsibilities, he would roll his eyes. "You wouldn't understand. Things aren't like they were in your time." He said your time like it was ancient history, irrelevant, dead. Each word chipped away at the bond we had built. There were nights he didn't come home, though he lived with me then. He'd stumble through the door at dawn, smelling of smoke and alcohol, sometimes wearing clothes I had never seen before. Once I found receipts in his pockets, clubs, bars, expensive restaurants that I knew his part-time job at the gas station could never afford. I wanted to ask, but fear held me back. Fear of the answer, fear of the distance growing between us. I told myself it was youth, just reckless youth. But deep down, a darker possibility whispered at me, and I silenced it because I wasn't ready to accept it. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone. His voice was sharp, impatient, talking about money deals people owing him. "Don't waste my time," he said, his tone laced with arrogance I didn't recognize. When I stepped into the room, he quickly ended the call and shoved the phone in his pocket. He smiled and said, "Just a friend, Grandpa." But my gut twisted. It wasn't the voice of a boy talking to a friend. It was the voice of a man learning to manipulate, to control, to threaten. I started seeing visitors' boys his age and older coming to the house when I wasn't around. They left quickly with hushed voices and nervous glances. The neighbors whispered. One of them, an old friend of mine, pulled me aside and said, "Be careful. I think Daniel's mixed up in things he shouldn't be." I brushed him off, defending my grandson. "He's just young, he'll grow out of it." Even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. The distance between us widened. He no longer came fishing, no longer sat in the workshop, no longer asked for my stories. When I tried to bridge the gap, he snapped, "Grandpa, stop living in the past. You don't know how the world works anymore." His words stung, but worse than the words was the contempt behind them. He didn't just disagree with me, he looked down on me. The final blow came one evening when I walked into the kitchen and found him rifling through the drawer where I kept my bank statements. He froze, then quickly shoved the papers back and forced a laugh. "Just looking for a pen," he said. But the lie was too thin. I didn't confront him then. I simply turned, walked to my chair, and sat in silence. But that night alone in my room, I stared at the ceiling and realized something the boy I raised with love and sacrifice was slipping away, replaced by someone I barely knew. Yet even then, I made excuses. I told myself it was a phase that life pressures him in ways I couldn't understand. I remembered the child who once clung to my hand, the boy who waved at me from a stage dressed as a tree. I couldn't let go of that image. And so I tolerated more than I should have. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt was all I had left. But the cracks were no longer small. They widened with every lie, every insult, every missing bill, every cold glance. And as much as I tried to pretend otherwise, the truth was forming like a storm on the horizon. A storm I would soon be forced to face, whether I was ready or not. And that storm finally broke when he slid the papers across the table. By then I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there, the missing money, the arrogance, the contempt, the lies. They were red flags waving right in front of me. But I had chosen blindness because the alternative was too painful. When the betrayal finally stood before me, in black and white, signed and stamped, I realized my denial had only made the fall sharper, the cut deeper. You see, betrayals don't arrive like lightning out of a clear sky. They creep in like cracks in a foundation, silent and visible, until one day the house collapses. And by the time you notice, it's too late to rebuild what's already fallen. I thought I had seen the worst of it when Daniel shoved those papers in front of me, papers that demanded my signature to transfer my house into his name. But life has a way of showing you that betrayal is never just one wound. It cuts deeper and then deeper still until you either bleed out or decide to fight. I remember that night clearly. The storm outside rattled the windows as if the world itself was warning me. Daniel sat across from me, his eyes hard, his lips curled in that impatient smirk I no longer recognized. "Sign it, Grandpa," he said. "It's just paperwork. You won't even notice the difference." I stared at him, at the grandson I once believed would carry my legacy with pride. And something inside me shifted. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. Instead, I asked for time. I told him I needed to think. He rolled his eyes but agreed, muttering something about how the old always dragged their feet. He didn't know that his arrogance had given me exactly what I needed a chance. When he left that night, I opened the drawer of my old desk and pulled out something I hadn't touched in years, a small black recorder. I had once used it for interviews when I was still working, capturing voices for notes and keeping records of important meetings. It had sat unused for decades, a relic of another life. But in that moment, it felt like a weapon waiting for the right war. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, and I knew the war had come. The next day, Daniel returned, cocky as ever, bringing with him 2 of his friends. They were loud, careless, reeking of smoke and cheap liquor. They sprawled across my couch, laughing about things they shouldn't have been proud of. Deals, scams, girls they had used and tossed aside. They spoke as if I were invisible, as if I were already dead. I sat quietly in my armchair, my hand resting casually on the side table, where the recorder lay hidden under a stack of magazines. The red light blinked silently, capturing every word. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but then Daniel started talking about money. He bragged about how he had tricked me, about how he had convinced me to pay his debts, without even realizing it. The old man doesn't have a clue, he said, his friends laughing. He thinks I'm just borrowing, but by the time he figures it out, everything will already be mine. He's weak. He'll cave. He always does. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. I let the words burn into the tape. I let the laughter become evidence, because I knew one day soon they would choke on those very words. Over the next weeks, I became an actor in my own home. Outwardly, I played the part of the confused, weary grandfather. I nodded when he mocked me, pretended to forget things, acted too frail to resist. Inside, I was cataloging everything, every lie, every insult, every transaction that smelled of rot. I followed the trail of missing money, calling the bank quietly, requesting records Daniel thought I was too old to understand. I learned about accounts opened in my name, about withdrawals I never authorized. I gathered copies, tucked them into a folder I hid beneath the floorboards in my bedroom. Each document was a brick in the wall. I was building a wall that would one day surround Daniel with no way out. And then came the night that sealed it all. Daniel stumbled in late, his shirt stained, his words slurred. He didn't see me waiting in the shadows of the kitchen. He was on the phone, speaking louder than he should have, his arrogance amplified by drink. Yeah, don't worry. Once the house is mine, we'll flip it. The old man doesn't even know what's coming. He thinks I love him, but he's just a stepping stone. A pathetic old stepping stone. He laughed a cruel, hollow laugh that echoed in my bones. That was the moment I knew love had died. Whatever bond we once had was gone, replaced by greed and contempt. And I had the proof in my hand. The recorder captured it all, but the twist didn't end there. A few days later, as I was searching through his room while he was out, I found a file on his desk. It wasn't hidden, almost as if he believed I'd never dare to look. Inside were drafts of letters, legal documents already prepared with my forged signature. He had been practicing. Dozens of sheets with my name scribbled, trying to mimic my handwriting. The sight made me sick, but it also made me stronger. He wasn't just trying to steal from me. He was rehearsing my erasure, planning for a future where I didn't exist. I copied every page, every forgery, every draft. Then I returned them exactly as I found them. He would never know I'd seen them, never know I was 2 steps ahead. The game he thought he was playing alone had just become a 2-player match. The irony is that Daniel believed he was the mastermind pulling strings, while I sat in the corner too frail to notice. But the truth was this: I had lived too long, seen too much to be blindsided forever. I had fought harder battles than he could imagine. And now I had something he would never expect, a strategy, a plan forged from patience and quiet observation. The early twist was this. While he thought he was building his trap for me, I had already started building mine for him. The difference was that his was sloppy, arrogant, built on lies and shortcuts. Mine was meticulous, documented, recorded. His was a firework, loud and flashy, burning out too quickly. Mine was a fuse, slow, deliberate, inevitable. One evening, as he stood over me waving those transfer papers in my face, demanding once again that I sign, I looked at him with the calm I had been cultivating. I pretended my hand trembled, pretended I might give in. Then I said softly, "Daniel, you might think I'm weak, but the truth is you've already lost and you don't even know it yet." He laughed, dismissing my words as the ramblings of an old man. But inside I savored the secret. Because I knew what he didn't, the day would come when those recordings, those documents, those forged signatures would speak louder than either of us. And when they did, it wouldn't be me on my knees in front of the court. It would be him. That was the twist, the one he never saw coming. While he celebrated his imagined victory, I was quietly sharpening the blade that would cut his arrogance to pieces. And though I hadn't yet revealed it, the truth was already mine, and soon justice would be too. After that night when I whispered my warning, Daniel grew bolder, as if daring me to resist him. He strutted around the house like he already owned it, rearranging furniture, tossing out things that held decades of memory. My wife's old rocking chair, the one she nursed our son in, vanished one morning. When I asked, he shrugged. It was ugly, outdated. "I did you a favor." He said it as though my memories were trash to be cleaned out. It wasn't just furniture. It was dignity. He began inviting strangers into my home without permission, young men with loud voices and shifty eyes who smoked in the living room and left beer bottles on the floor. They treated me like I was invisible or worse, an obstacle. I sat silently pretending frailty, while my recorder captured everything, their boasts about shady deals, their laughter about how easily people were fooled, the way Daniel bragged that he would soon inherit, not just a house, but a whole kingdom built by a fool too weak to protect it. But it didn't stop there. Daniel began involving the family. He went to my sister, a kind woman in her 80s who trusted him, and whispered poison in her ear. "Grandpa's slipping," he told her. "He's forgetting things. He left the stove on last week. He's not safe alone. I need to take over before something bad happens." She called me in tears, asking if it was true, asking if I needed help. The shame of her doubt cut deep, not because she wanted to help, but because the seed he planted was already taking root. Soon, cousins and distant relatives began calling, some with concern, others with greedy interest. "Maybe it's time you let Daniel handle things," one said. "He's young, strong, capable. You should rest." Rest. That word stung. Rest was a polite way of telling me to step aside, to surrender, to admit defeat. But what none of them knew was that I was already preparing for war. Daniel escalated, bringing in a lawyer of his own. A slick young man in a shiny suit who arrived one morning with papers neatly stacked in a leather folder. He introduced himself as Mr. Carter, though the arrogance in his voice made me wonder if he was a lawyer or just another opportunist smelling blood in the water. "We can make this easy," Carter said smoothly. "Sign over the property now and Daniel will take responsibility for everything. It will save you stress, confusion, and let's be honest, future embarrassment." His eyes glittered not with concern, but with calculation. He believed Daniel's lies. Or maybe he simply didn't care, as long as there was money to be made. I played the part of the frail old man, my hands trembling as I held the papers. I need time," I stammered, letting my voice crack. Daniel smirked, confident. Carter patted my shoulder as though I were a child. "Of course. But don't wait too long. These matters can get messy." They left, and I sat alone in my kitchen, the papers untouched on the table. My hands still trembled, but not from fear, from rage, from resolve. That week, Daniel began pressuring me daily. He followed me from room to room, hounded me with questions, cornered me with threats disguised as pleasantries. Come on, Grandpa, don't make this hard. You don't want to end up in court, do you? Everyone will think you've lost your mind. They'll pity you. Is that what you want?" His voice dripped with disdain, but beneath it, I heard something else: desperation. He wanted this quickly before I could fight back. And that meant I still had time. I reached out to an old friend, a retired judge named Walter, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. We had once hunted together, shared stories by campfires long ago. When I explained what was happening, his voice hardened. "Do you have proof?" he asked. I told him about the recordings, the bank statements, the forged signatures. There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "That's more than proof. That's a case. But be careful. If Daniel knows you have it, he might get reckless." His warning settled in my bones, and reckless was exactly what Daniel became. One evening I caught him in my study, rifling through drawers, searching. He froze when he saw me, then forced a laugh, just looking for some old photos. But his eyes darted to the floorboards where I kept the folder. My heart pounded, but I stayed calm. I shuffled forward slowly, as if tired, as if oblivious, and closed the drawer myself. "Photos are in the closet," I said. His jaw tightened. He knew I knew. That night, the air in the house felt heavier, charged with unspoken hostility. Daniel didn't hide his contempt anymore. He barked orders, mocked my routines, insulted my cooking. At dinner, he slammed his fork down and snarled, "You think you're still in control, old man? You're not. Everyone's on my side. You're alone." He didn't know I had already started building alliances, that Walter was guiding me, that I had quietly contacted a lawyer of my own, a seasoned attorney named Margaret, who believed in fighting for dignity, not just dollars. But escalation isn't only in words, it's in action. One night, Daniel's friends returned, louder, drunker, angrier. They cornered me in my own kitchen, laughing, one of them nudging my shoulder roughly. "So, old man, when's the party? When do we celebrate your big move to the nursing home?" They laughed until my walls shook with it. My hands clenched under the table, but I didn't break. Instead, I let the recorder in my pocket drink in their cruelty. Every insult, every threat captured. Evidence. Ammunition. The next morning, Daniel tried a different tactic: pity. He sat across from me, his tone suddenly soft, almost gentle. "Grandpa, don't you want to rest? Don't you want to stop worrying about bills, repairs, this big empty house? Let me take care of it. Let me take care of you." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. For a moment I saw the boy he once was, the boy who had clung to me in the rain outside the schoolhouse. But then I remembered the words on the recording, the laughter about the pathetic old stepping stone. I pulled my hand away. "I'm not your burden," I said quietly. His eyes darkened, the mask slipping. Days turned into weeks, the pressure mounting like a storm cloud ready to burst. Daniel began yelling, slamming doors, punching walls. My neighbors heard the shouting, some called to check on me. I brushed them off, but inside I filed away every witness, every potential ally. The tension built until one night he lost control completely. He grabbed me by the collar, shaking me, his face inches from mine. "Sign it," he roared. "Sign it before I make you." For a moment, fear gripped me. His strength was real, his rage terrifying. But then calm settled over me. Because in that instant, I realized the escalation had gone too far. His violence, his threats, his arrogance, it would all bury him. I pressed the button on the recorder in my pocket, letting it capture every word, every shout, every threat. And when he finally released me, shoving me back into my chair, I smiled faintly. He mistook it for weakness, for surrender. But it was something else entirely. It was victory waiting for its day in the light. The escalation wasn't just his. It was mine too. Quiet, invisible, deliberate. While he raged and threatened, I gathered, documented, prepared. And soon the storm he thought he was unleashing on me would come crashing down on him instead. because the old man he thought was too weak, too outdated, too irrelevant, had already turned every insult, every threat, every forged signature into the very weapons that would destroy him. And the day was coming soon when those weapons would be unleashed in the one place he thought he would never lose the court. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where history whispered through every echo of footsteps. I had walked into many rooms in my life, church halls, barns, factories, even battlefields, but never one that carried the weight of judgment quite like this. My cane clicked against the floor as I entered slow and steady, while Daniel strode ahead like a conquering hero. He wore a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes glittering with arrogance. To the few relatives who came to watch, he waved, smirked, whispered that today was the day the old man would finally step aside. When the judge called us to order Daniel's lawyer, Carter rose immediately. His voice was smooth, his words rehearsed. "Your Honor, we are here today because my client has serious concerns about his grandfather's capacity to manage his estate. The evidence will show that Mr. Whitmore," he gestured toward me with a flourish, "is no longer capable of handling his affairs. My client, out of love and duty, seeks to protect him and ensure the family's assets are preserved. Lies wrapped in silk." That was what Carter was good at. He painted me as fragile, forgetful, stumbling toward incompetence. He spoke of missed bills, misplaced items, supposed confusion, all stories Daniel had fed him. And with each lie, Daniel sat straighter, glancing at me with that smug grin, the kind that dared me to object, dared me to prove otherwise. My attorney Margaret didn't rise immediately. She let Carter spin his web, let the lies hang heavy in the air. Only when he finished, only when Daniel leaned back, satisfied, did she stand. Her voice was calm, deliberate, each word sharpened like a blade. "Your Honor, what you are about to hear is not the story of a frail old man losing his way. It is the story of betrayal. A betrayal so calculated, so cruel, that it nearly cost my client his home, his dignity, and his family name. But today we will show the truth." The judge, a stern woman with eyes that missed nothing, nodded. "Proceed." Daniel was called to testify first. He strutted to the stand, placing one hand on the Bible with a smirk that suggested he thought God himself was on his side. He answered Carter's questions with practiced charm. "Of course I love my grandfather. I've lived with him for years, taken care of him. But lately he's been slipping, forgetting things, leaving the stove on, giving away money without realizing it. I'm only trying to protect him, to protect what he built." He played the role of the dutiful grandson so well that some people in the gallery nodded sympathetically. Then Margaret stood. "Mr. Whitmore." She began, her tone polite but firm. "You claim to be protecting your grandfather. Tell me, how many times have you invited your friends into his home without his consent?" Daniel stiffened, then forced a laugh. "They're my friends, we hang out. No harm in that. No harm." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Did you or did you not mock your grandfather in front of these friends, calling him weak, pathetic, and a stepping stone?" Daniel's smirk faltered. "I never said that," he snapped. Margaret pressed a button on the small recorder placed on the evidence table. Suddenly, the courtroom filled with Daniel's own voice, clear and cruel. "The old man doesn't have a clue. He's weak. He'll cave. He always does. He's just a pathetic old stepping stone." The gallery gasped. The judge's eyes narrowed. Daniel's face drained of color. That's taken out of context," he stammered. "Context," Margaret's voice cut like ice. "Would you like us to play more context?" Daniel fidgeted, his confidence unraveling. "No, that's unnecessary." But Margaret wasn't finished. She produced the forged documents, page after page of my signature clumsily imitated. "Do these belong to you, Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I was practicing, just in case. It doesn't mean anything. Practicing forgery." Margaret asked, her voice rising. Practicing to erase your grandfather's name, his legacy, his very existence. Is that what love looks like to you? Daniel's hands clenched, his face twisted. He looked toward Carter, but even the slick lawyer seemed rattled. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly, leaning on my cane, and walked to the stand. My steps were heavy, but my voice was clear. I looked Daniel in the eye as I spoke. I am not weak. I am not senile. I am not confused. What I am is a man who sacrificed everything to raise a boy who turned his back on me. I paid his debts. I fed him, clothed him, gave him a roof when no one else would. And this is how he repays me, by plotting to steal the only home I have left. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't stop. Yes, I forget things sometimes. Yes, I am old. But old doesn't mean blind. I saw the arrogance, I saw the lies, I heard the words he spoke behind my back, and I gathered every piece of proof because dignity matters more than fear. Today, I am here not just for myself, but for every parent, every grandparent who has been taken advantage of by the ones they trusted most. The silence in the courtroom was thick. Some relatives lowered their heads in shame. Even Carter looked uneasy. Margaret stepped forward one last time. Your Honor, the recordings, the documents, the threats. This is not the behavior of a grandson protecting his elder. This is the behavior of a predator circling his prey. We ask that the court not only deny his petition, but recognize the attempt for what it is, fraud. The judge leaned forward, her eyes piercing Daniel. Mr. Whitmore, do you have anything to say for yourself? Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. His confidence, his arrogance, all crumbled under the weight of his own voice echoing in the chamber. He sank back in his chair, his shoulders slumped, his jaw clenched in defeat. And in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in months, justice, sharp and undeniable, rising like a flame in the ashes of betrayal. The judge's gavel struck once sharp as thunder, and in that single sound, the weight of months' years even lifted off my shoulders. Her voice was steady, unwavering, as she delivered the ruling. The petition is denied. The court finds clear evidence of attempted fraud, coercion, and forgery. Mr. Daniel Whitmore is hereby barred from handling or claiming any portion of his grandfather's estate. This court further recommends the matter of forgery be reviewed by the district attorney. The words echoed through the chamber like church bells on a cold morning. Daniel's face twisted, rage and disbelief warring with humiliation. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but Carter, his lawyer, grabbed his arm, whispering sharply. Daniel yanked it away and sank back into his seat, his fists clenched, his knuckles white. For the first time in months, he looked smaller to me, not because of his size, but because the arrogance that made him loom so large had been stripped away. I sat silently, hands folded over my cane. My heart didn't leap in triumph, nor did I feel the sweetness of revenge. What I felt was quieter, deeper. Relief. Justice. A reclamation of the dignity he had tried to steal. After court adjourned, family members gathered in hushed clusters. Some approached me, their eyes downcast, shame written on their faces. My daughter, his mother, came last. Her voice trembled. Dad, I didn't know it would go this far. I looked at her, at the lines time had etched into her face, and I wondered if she truly hadn't known, or if she had chosen not to see. I gave her no answer. Some wounds were too raw to cover with quick words. She wept softly, but I remained still. Daniel stormed out of the courthouse without a glance back. Perhaps one day he would reflect on what he had done. Perhaps not. That was no longer my burden to carry. That evening I returned home. The same front door I had walked through 1,000 times, the same walls that had watched both laughter and betrayal. But this time it felt different. The silence wasn't heavy with dread. It was peaceful. I walked through the rooms, slowly touching the furniture he had once mocked, the photographs He had nearly erased the floorboards beneath which my folder of evidence still lay hidden. I didn't need to hide it anymore. The truth had already spoken. I stood in my workshop, the smell of sawdust still lingering from projects long finished. On the bench lay the small hammer I had once placed in Daniel's little hand. I picked it up, turned it over, felt the weight of memory. It no longer stung. It was just a reminder that love, no matter how betrayed, had once been real. And for me, that was enough. In the days that followed, neighbors stopped by. They brought casseroles, pies, handshakes, words of quiet admiration. "You showed strength," one said. "You didn't let them take what was yours." Another nodded. "You reminded all of us that age isn't weakness." Their words warmed me, but I didn't need praise. What mattered was that I had proven to myself, to my family, to anyone watching, that dignity doesn't expire with age. I thought often of Daniel in those days. I wondered if he sat alone, angry and plotting, or if a part of him finally recognized the man I still was. Did he regret it? Did he remember the fishing trips, the lessons, the silver watch on his wrist, or had greed drowned it all beyond recognition? I may never know. And maybe that's the hardest part of betrayal, not the act itself, but the not knowing if the person you loved will ever see the damage they've done. But even without his remorse, I chose peace. I chose to live out my days in the home I built with my own hands, among the echoes of laughter that once filled it, among the memories of a wife who loved me, children I raised, and a grandson I once believed would carry my name with honor. I am not naive. I know there are others like Daniel in the world, others who see age as weakness, who mistake kindness for surrender. And I know there are men and women like me, elders, who sit quietly, silently, enduring, afraid to speak, afraid to fight. To them I say this: do not let them take your dignity. Do not let betrayal silence you. Age may bend the body, but it sharpens the soul. And sometimes the greatest strength is simply refusing to fall when everyone expects you to. So here I am, 70 years old, still standing, still breathing, still fighting when I must. I lost a grandson that day in court, but I regained something far greater, the truth of who I am. I am not weak. I am not finished. I am a man who has lived, who has bled, who has loved, and who will not bow to betrayal. And now I ask you, the ones who listen to my story, the ones who carry their own scars, what would you have done if the person you loved most tried to erase you, to steal everything you built? Would you have surrendered? Or would you have risen as I did to reclaim your dignity? Leave your answer. Let me know if you too believe that age is not the end but the sharpest edge of all.